They laughed at humanity, calling us primitive, violent brutes, until their own world burned. The Galactic Union had one unshakable truth: humanity was unworthy. For decades, the ruling alien species mocked Earth's chaotic history, its wars, its tribal conflicts, its unpolished diplomacy. They labeled humans as dangerous anomalies, barely more than animals, unfit to join their prestigious alliance of enlightened civilizations. Humanity tried. They sent diplomats, scientists, and envoys, hoping to prove they were more than their past. But each time, they were met with the same disdain. Savages. Brutes. A species doomed to destroy itself. And so, Earth stopped trying. Then came the disaster. A catastrophic event struck Velzoreth, homeworld of the Seraphon, one of the most influential races in the Union. An unstoppable force had breached their defenses, tearing through their towering cities, spreading chaos and death. The Galactic Union convened an emergency meeting. Every advanced race pooled their technology, their brightest minds, their most elite soldiers. And they all failed. Velzoreth was falling. Panic spread like wildfire. The same union that once stood as a beacon of power now begged for a miracle. Then, in their desperation, they turned to the only species they had never considered before. The one species that understood chaos. The one species that had survived against impossible odds for millennia. The one species that had been preparing for war and disaster long before they reached the stars. Humans. A distress call was sent. But this time, it was not an invitation. It was a plea. And for the first time in history, humanity had the power to decide whether to answer, or let the galaxy burn. Velzoreth was dying. The once glistening towers that scraped the sky were now collapsing in flame and ruin. The mighty defense systems of the Galactic Union had been ripped apart like paper, and no one understood how. The enemy had no name, because none had survived long enough to identify them. All the Seraphon knew was that their capital was overrun by a force unlike anything they had ever encountered. Their energy shields, rendered useless. Their weapons, shattered before they could fire. Their warships, fleeing rather than fighting. It was an enemy beyond strategy, beyond reason, beyond their understanding. The Galactic Union's most elite forces had been annihilated in mere hours. Entire battalions wiped out without explanation, leaving behind nothing but static on their comms. The proudest warriors of the Union, helpless. The desperate call. The Union's high command had never considered humanity for anything more than an afterthought. But now, their desperation outweighed their arrogance. The emergency transmission was sent. To Earth. A signal, short and desperate. Help us. Velzoreth is lost. You are our last hope. On Earth, the message was received in silence. For years, humanity had been pushed aside, insulted, and ignored. They had been laughed at when they asked for inclusion in the Galactic Union's inner councils. They had been deemed too aggressive, too crude, too warlike. And now? Now those same voices were begging. The United Earth Command gathered in a war room deep beneath the surface of their planet. The leaders of Earth's nations, its most brilliant minds, its most deadly warriors, all stood in silence as they watched the footage of Velzoreth burning. No one spoke. Then, General Keegan, a man whose entire career had been spent being dismissed by these so-called civilized aliens, leaned forward. They call us savages, he muttered. Let's see how their enlightened ways hold up without us. Across the table, another voice spoke. Do we let them burn? For the first time in history, humanity was not the one begging to be recognized. They were the ones holding all the power. The room was dead silent, waiting for a decision. And then, Earth's Supreme Commander finally spoke. Prepare the fleet. The stars trembled as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace. For centuries, the Galactic Union had regarded humanity as little more than barbarians in metal shells, aggressive warmongers that had no place among the so-called civilized races. Their crude ships, their primitive tactics, nothing about them seemed remarkable. But now? Now, they were the only ones left to fight. The UES Warborn led the fleet, a behemoth of steel and fire, bristling with weapons the Union had never seen before. Hundreds of warships followed in its wake, each one scarred from past battles, their hulls carrying the history of a species that had known only struggle and survival. In the ruined skies of Velzorith, the once mighty Union fleet had been reduced to burning wreckage. The surviving Seraphon ships fled the battlefield, desperate to escape the nameless force that had turned their empire to ash. And yet, the humans advanced. The enemy revealed. Inside the Warborn, Admiral Jonathan Graves watched the battle unfold on the main holoscreen. The enemy ships moved like ghosts, shifting in and out of existence as if reality itself bent to their will. No life signs, no comm signals, no demands, just destruction. What the hell are they? Even as the Admiral pondered this, the enemy fleet turned towards them. The Seraphon had fled. But the humans? They were not running. All ships, prepare for engagement, Graves ordered, his voice steady. Let's show these things what savages can do. The first battle. The first wave came silently, no energy buildup, no visible projectiles, just a sudden disintegration of an entire human destroyer, its structure vanishing as if it had never existed. Holy, the comms erupted in panic. But then, humanity fought back. Fire at will. Missiles, railguns, plasma lances, weapons of war that had shaped Earth's violent history, ripped through the battlefield. The enemy had no shields. No armor. They were invincible to the Seraphon, but not to humans. The first enemy warship shattered into nothingness, followed by another. Confirmed kills, Admiral. For the first time, the nameless enemy hesitated. They had slaughtered entire fleets without resistance. They had crushed the best the Union had to offer without losing a single ship. But humanity was different. For the first time in their existence, they were facing something they did not understand. And as the human fleet pressed forward, the message was clear. The real savages had arrived. This doesn't make sense. Admiral Graves stood in the command center of the UES Warborn, staring at the holodisplay. The battle had been brutal, but humanity had pushed back the invaders, the first species to ever do so. And yet, something was wrong. A new kind of war. The alien fleet had no communication signals, no apparent chain of command. They fought with precision, yet without emotion, almost as if they were not alive. "Sir, our scans are picking up something unusual," said Lieutenant Harris, the ship's top analyst. He hesitated, then brought up the data. No organic life signs. No biological presence whatsoever. Graves frowned. "You're saying, they're machines?" "Not just machines, sir." Harris gulped. "There's something worse. An impossible discovery." The wreckage of a destroyed enemy vessel had been brought aboard for analysis. Engineers in full-body suits worked tirelessly, prying open the smooth, black metal that seemed to shift under the light. Suddenly. "Get back." The entire slab of alien metal liquefied, tendrils of shifting nanomaterial lashing out like living wires. The nearest engineer screamed as his suit disintegrated, his body turning to dust in an instant. Security teams fired, plasma rounds, kinetic rifles, even incendiary grenades, but nothing worked. The alien substance reformed, learning, adapting to each new attack. Then, without warning, it stopped moving. The room fell into horrified silence. The ghosts of a forgotten war. "Sir," Harris whispered, his face pale as he stared at the analysis screen. "These things, they're not just AI. They're not just machines. Graves clenched his jaw. Then what are they? The lieutenant swallowed hard. They're a weapon left behind from a war that ended before we even existed. The bridge went silent. Harris continued, his voice shaking. We're looking at an extinct race's doomsday weapon. Something designed to wipe out organic life, but with no one left to give the shutdown command. The pieces clicked together in Graves' mind. These machines, these nameless horrors, weren't fighting for territory. They weren't seeking revenge. They were simply finishing their last order. And now, humanity was just the next target. The Union betrayal. Before the gravity of the situation could fully settle in, a new alert blared across the command deck. Admiral! Incoming fleet, Union ships. Graves turned sharply. Reinforcements? The officer hesitated. No, sir. They're ordering us to stand down. A cold chill ran through the room. The Union, the same arrogant civilization that had mocked and ridiculed humanity, was now demanding they cease fire, against the very enemy that had nearly wiped them out. Put them on screen, Graves growled. The holographic image of a Seraphon Chancellor appeared, his reptilian features twisted into a condescending smirk. Humans, your assistance is no longer required, he declared. The Union will negotiate with the enemy directly. Stand down and return to your territory. The bridge erupted in disbelief. Negotiate, one officer shouted. With machines? They're not alive, Harris added. They don't talk. They just kill. Graves' fists clenched. The Seraphon had already abandoned their own allies to die, now they were betraying the only ones who could fight back. A choice lay ahead. Obey the Union. Or do what humanity always did best. We don't run. We never have. Admiral Graves stood tall on the command deck, his face stern as he stared at the Union fleet in the distance, still broadcasting their demands for humanity to retreat. It was a betrayal that stung, and the weight of it felt like a crushing blow to everything humanity had ever fought for. But there was no time for regrets. A bleak decision. We can't retreat, sir, Lieutenant Harris said, her voice barely above a whisper. If we do, the Seraphon will abandon us completely. They'll leave us to face this threat alone. Graves looked over at his officers, his gaze hardening. We won't retreat. Not while our people are out there fighting. He turned to the holodisplay, displaying the tactical map of the battlefront. The alien machines, unyielding and relentless, were advancing. Their fleet had already destroyed several human outposts, leaving only the stronghold at Earth as a bastion of humanity's survival. All hands, prepare for battle, Graves ordered. This is our fight now. No one else is coming. The final stand. As the crew rallied together, preparing to defend their last stronghold, humanity's fate rested on the shoulders of the UES Warborn and its crew. Graves knew that their resources were nearly exhausted. The Warborn's shields were battered, the engines strained from constant warfare. Yet, they still had one advantage: unity. We have no other choice, Graves said as he met each of his officers' eyes. This is our moment. Our chance to prove what humanity can do when we stand together. The plan was simple but dangerous. The Warborn would lead a direct assault on the enemy's command center, a massive ship believed to be controlling the robotic fleet. If they could disable it, the rest of the machines would follow suit. If they failed, however, the entirety of humanity would be wiped out, its memory nothing but a footnote in history. As the crew prepared for battle, the holographic projections of the remaining human fleet assembled. It was a pale shadow of what humanity once had, but they fought with courage. Together, they advanced on the enemy's position, their ships acting as one, each ship playing its part in a final, desperate stand. Graves glanced over at his veteran crew. You know the stakes. No one gets left behind. The battle begins. The roar of cannons and the shudder of missiles launched reverberated through the warborn. The enemy fleet was closing in, and the final countdown had begun. Graves stood motionless, watching as the first wave of human fighters engaged the robotic machines. It was the most brutal battle humanity had ever faced, but there was a relentless fire in every human fighter's heart. The enemy responded with sophisticated countermeasures, their nanoshields absorbing blasts and reforming their ships after each strike. Nothing seemed to work. "Report, Lieutenant." Graves barked. "Direct hits, sir. They're still advancing. We're not making a dent." Harris's voice was filled with desperation, but there was no room for panic now. "Focus fire on their command vessel," Graves commanded. "We hit them there, we hit them hard." The warborn's plasma cannons lit up the dark void of space, sending waves of destructive force toward the massive, black machine at the heart of the enemy fleet. But the enemy retaliated with an intensity that left no room for mercy. Their ships seemed to adapt. Each time the humans struck, the machines responded, learning, evolving with terrifying speed. A glimmer of hope. "Admiral, we've detected a weakness," Harris reported, her voice tinged with hope. "The enemy command ship, it's shifting its defensive structure. We can punch through." Graves didn't hesitate. "All ships, converge on that target. This is our final chance." The warborn and its remaining allies surged forward, their weapons blasting at the command vessel. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing move. Then, a stunning breakthrough, the command ship's defenses flickered for just a moment. In that instant, the humans struck, sending a final, fatal blast into the heart of the machine. It was the tipping point. The enemy fleet's coordinated strike pattern collapsed, the machines suddenly unable to adjust fast enough. One by one, the ships began to fall. The massive war machine at the heart of the fleet was destroyed, and the rest of the enemy forces turned into scattered, confused remnants. A hard-earned victory. As the dust settled, Graves stood on the command deck, breathing deeply. The damage to the warborn was extensive, but the battle was over. Humanity had won, not because they were stronger, not because they had more advanced technology, but because they had fought together. "You did it, sir," Harris said, her voice filled with awe. "We did it." Graves nodded. "We fought for each other. We fought for our future." Victory always comes with a cost. But some costs are heavier than others. The warborn limped back to Earth, its engines barely functional after the brutal battle. The once mighty fleet of humanity was now a shadow of its former self. But for Admiral Graves, the true battle was only just beginning. The machines were defeated, yes, but the greater enemy had just revealed itself. And it wasn't the aliens or their robotic minions. It was the Union. Aftermath of the war. The news of humanity's victory spread like wildfire, but there was little celebration. Earth was scarred, the planet's surface marked by the devastation of the war. In the cities, the reconstruction efforts had barely begun. A sense of exhaustion hung heavy in the air. Graves stood in the warborn's command center, staring at the empty space where the Union fleet had once stood. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something bigger than the war itself. Humanity had proven itself to be a force to be reckoned with, but now, the question loomed, what did the rest of the galaxy think of them? "Admiral, we've received new transmissions," Harris said, breaking his thoughts. Her voice was strained. "The Union is questioning our role. They're demanding answers for how we fought." "Answers?" Graves muttered, a bitter laugh escaping him. "We fought because we had to. But it seems that's not enough for them." An uneasy peace. The Union was no longer the ally humanity thought it was. With the defeat of the machines, the Union's leaders had begun to reassess humanity's place in the galaxy. They viewed the humans as a wild card, a species that had once been looked down upon but had now proven they were capable of extraordinary feats. But in their eyes, that meant one thing: danger. The Union's decision-makers were no longer sending messages of congratulations. Instead, their transmissions were filled with suspicion, fear, and disdain. They questioned how humanity had been able to fight back so effectively. They demanded to know the true extent of their capabilities and whether humanity could be trusted. The questions were always the same: how did you manage to destroy the machines? What are you hiding? For the first time, Graves felt the weight of their victory. The war might have been over, but the political war had just begun. And this one was far more dangerous. A growing divide. "We've been invited to a summit with the Union," Harris announced later that week. "They want us to come to their space for negotiations. They've sent a representative to Earth." Negotiations? Graves shook his head. "This isn't a negotiation. This is a power play." The Union's invitation felt more like an ultimatum than a peace offering. They were questioning humanity's every move, their every decision. What had once been allies were now hostile. The leaders of the Union saw humanity as a threat, an uncontrollable force that had defied expectations and now needed to be kept in check. The representative arrived on Earth a few days later, a stern-faced diplomat named Lyra Venora. She was an imposing figure, an alien from the Jorvian race with eyes that glowed an eerie blue, a clear sign of their advanced technology. But despite her seemingly diplomatic appearance, Graves could see the tension in her posture. She was not here to make peace, she was here to dominate. A meeting of minds? Graves met with Venora in a secure facility. The tension in the room was palpable as the two leaders locked eyes. Graves knew this was not going to be a simple discussion. "Admiral Graves," Venora began, her voice smooth, yet cold. "Humanity has proven itself capable of things we never anticipated. Your people are surprising. But dangerous." Graves didn't flinch. "We've fought for our survival, nothing more. If you consider that dangerous, then maybe it's you who don't understand us." "Perhaps," Venora replied, her smile thin and measured. "But we are the ones who hold the power now. You, and your people, must prove that you can be trusted. Your actions have consequences, and we will ensure that humanity does not become a threat to the peace we've worked so hard to maintain." Graves held her gaze. She wasn't interested in peace, she was interested in control. A glimpse of the future. As the meeting continued, Venora's true intentions began to surface. Humanity had won the war, yes, but now they were being manipulated into a corner. The Union had its own plans, and humanity was simply a piece in their larger puzzle. If humanity did not submit to their authority, they would face sanctions, and the Union would make sure humanity could never rise again. Graves realized that the stakes had escalated beyond what he had ever imagined. The war against the machines had been only the beginning. The true challenge for humanity now lay in diplomacy, a battle of minds and wills that could determine whether humanity would thrive or be crushed under the weight of a superior galaxy. An unexpected ally. Days later, just as things seemed bleak, a surprising transmission came through. It was from the Seraphon, the very alien race that had once declared humanity to be savages. Their fleet had disappeared after the defeat of the machines, but they hadn't gone unnoticed. "We saw what you did," the message began. "And we want to talk. You've earned something, but we're not sure if it's trust. Yet." Graves leaned forward, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. The Seraphon, the aliens who had been the most vocal opponents of humanity, were now extending a hand, perhaps even an alliance. But what did it mean? Peace has a cost, one that cannot always be counted in ships or soldiers. Sometimes, it is paid in trust, and sometimes, in loss. The tension had reached its peak. Admiral Graves stood at the helm of the Warborn, looking out across the fractured horizon of Earth. The Union was tightening its grip, their demands now more than ever. The Seraphon had extended an olive branch, but their motives were unclear. And yet, despite everything, Graves could sense a shift. Humanity had reached an impasse. It was no longer about fighting a war, but navigating a labyrinth of power, trust, and sacrifice. An unlikely alliance. As Graves sat in his command room, he reflected on the past few weeks. The Union had forced humanity into a corner. Their questions had evolved from skepticism to open hostility. Meanwhile, the Seraphon's message had been an unexpected lifeline, offering humanity the chance for something more, a chance to break free from the Union's chokehold and create a new future. But was it too good to be true? The Seraphon had never been known for their benevolence, nor had they been sympathetic to humans in the past. Their previous comments had been filled with condescension, dismissing humanity as mere savages. But something had changed. Perhaps the defeat of the machines had forced them to reassess their position, or perhaps they had simply realized that the galaxy was a much more complex place than they had once believed. Regardless, they had reached out to Graves, and now the question was whether humanity could afford to trust them. Graves knew that if the Union found out about the Seraphon's offer, it would only strengthen their resolve to keep humanity under their thumb. He couldn't let that happen. Yet, he also knew that rejecting the Seraphon's offer outright could result in the complete isolation of humanity, cut off from the very allies who might be able to help them face the Union's ever-growing power. The gamble was immense, but the stakes were higher than ever before. The weight of trust. Admiral Graves, the Seraphon ambassador, is ready to meet, Harris informed him, breaking him from his thoughts. Graves straightened up, steeling himself for the upcoming conversation. The ambassador, a tall, imposing figure named Alisera, was a leader among the Seraphon, and her reputation was one of calculated diplomacy. But Graves had learned long ago that such beings were never to be taken at face value. Every word they spoke had layers, hidden meanings that required constant vigilance. Alisera stepped into the room, her cold, glowing blue eyes studying Graves with an intensity that felt almost physical. There was no handshake, no pleasantries, just a silent recognition of the weight of the situation. "Admiral," Alisera began, her voice like a whisper of wind cutting through the air. "We have observed humanity's actions with great interest. Your people have defied every expectation. And that has earned you a place in our future." Graves met her gaze. "Why? What is it that you want?" Alisera's lips curved into a thin smile. "It is not what we want, Admiral. It is what you need. The Union is a colossus, an empire that rules through fear and manipulation. They would crush you, given the chance. But the Seraphon, we understand the value of freedom. We understand the value of self-determination." Graves didn't blink. "And you think we should trust you after everything?" Alisera's eyes gleamed. "Trust, Admiral, is earned. We offer it now, but you must understand, our alliance will change everything. It will shift the balance of power in ways you cannot foresee. The price of that change is higher than you think. The cost of peace." Graves knew there was more to this than met the eye. The Seraphon were offering a chance, but nothing came without a price. The galaxy had always been a place of complex alliances and shifting allegiances. The Union was one force, but the Seraphon were another, one with their own agenda, an agenda that could very well conflict with humanity's interests. "Tell me," Graves said carefully, "what does peace look like in the galaxy? What does it cost?" Alisera's expression hardened, and her voice lowered. "Peace is not an easy thing to secure. It requires sacrifice. Sometimes, it means abandoning old grudges. Other times, it means taking actions that weigh heavily on the soul. But it also means survival. Humanity cannot stand alone forever. You need allies." Graves felt the weight of her words settle on his shoulders like a stone. Survival was the key. Humanity had fought for so long to preserve its existence, to stand tall in the face of overwhelming forces. But now, it wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving in a galaxy full of ancient powers. The Seraphon had something humanity needed, but it wasn't the same as the Union's subjugation. This was an opportunity to shift the balance in humanity's favor. But what would humanity have to give up to accept that help? The decision. As Graves sat at his desk later that night, he couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The familiar faces of the Union, of the Seraphon, of all the alien species that humanity had met, now seemed like ghosts, reminders of the choices he was about to make. He had fought for humanity's freedom, for the right to decide its own future. The war had proven that humans had the strength to face any adversary, to overcome impossible odds. But now, the question was whether humanity could negotiate a future, one that didn't involve bending the knee to the Union or being swallowed by the Seraphon. Would the Seraphon truly be the ally they claimed to be, or was this simply another form of control? Graves couldn't trust easily, but he couldn't afford to make the same mistakes again. The decisions he made now would shape humanity's future for generations to come. He looked out at the stars. Humanity had fought to be free, and now, it had to decide what that freedom would cost. A new dawn. The next day, Graves sent his response to the Seraphon. The message was clear: humanity would stand on its own, but it would take their help, but only on humanity's terms. They had a future, and they would decide what that future looked like, not the Union, not the Seraphon, and not anyone else. And as the Warborn began its course toward the stars, humanity's future remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: the price of peace had been paid in the currency of trust, and humanity would now chart its course into a new era, one where it would never again bow to the whims of a higher power.